Hello everyone, welcome to episode 3 of The Wheels of Time. So this episode is called the pre-war period of film. So basically any films that came after the war basically. This is around about obviously the early 50s. For Hollywood for instance, they started to struggle in these years. Mainly making money from films etc. But also there's a few actors in the Hollywood kind of institute that started to get blacklisted for certain reasons, mainly to do with communism and things like that. One would be Charlie Chaplin and obviously Dalton Trumbo. Also, this was a time for Hollywood to make some changes in how they wanted to make films now, and all around the world really. They decided to make films bigger and better. Try and give people more epic stories on the larger scale, wider, lot longer in terms of films, and so they started to get into that. And obviously the 50s was the start of the era of the New Wave, French New Wave in particular, and one of the most pioneering kind of film directors of the French New Wave was obviously Francois Truffaut, who established that kind of wave of film. So let's get into the first film, shall we? So the first film I picked for the 50s era is Sunset Boulevard. This was made in 1950 by Billy Wilder. Quite a big director and writer in that time of Hollywood, but the reason why obviously I chose this film is probably most of you know, if you know this film, that it's actually kind of like one of the first kind of meta films. One of the first films to kind of film about film. And obviously this actual film centralises around a writer struggling to make it in Hollywood. And basically he ends up kind of getting lost because he's trying to escape from the cops because I think his car's not his, or he's not meant to be paying for it, he's meant to be selling it to a loan shark. But he ends up parking in this old rundown mansion where someone actually lives there. Eventually finds out that actually someone does live there. They bring him in, and the owner of the house is an old silent film star, actress as you will, and basically she's in hiding been there for many years. Obviously she's not making any more films at the moment because she's a silent actor, and because of the movement of the times, of technology and things, silent actors aren't necessarily needed anymore. It's all about sound and things like that. So eventually them two come together and they write, she's written a film and they want to obviously strengthen the script and things like that. And it goes on from there. I think the great thing about this film is how it deals with, like I said, the meta film. It deals with the struggling, it's quite a realistic approach, but it deals with the struggles of silent actors and how they adapt to the changes of modernity and how they adapt to the changes of cinema, how it changes and advances. And how some of them struggle to kind of adapt, and they don't bring what speaking actors can bring like the silent actors can bring. And in this film eventually the main actress gets obsessed with herself. She is obsessed with herself, and she eventually they write the script together, but the main character, ends up meeting this other woman, and they're in love and things. And obviously the other woman, the silent actress woman, she kind of treats him she's like his son, and she wants him for her own. And without giving any spoilers away, you eventually find out that she's got a bit of a history of trying to kill herself and things. And the butler who serves her in her mansion, you actually find out a little bit of mystery about him as well, and he's quite a significant figure, even though he's just a minor character. He ends up being quite a big character right at the end. But I guess the great thing about it is it ends up, showing you how far people can go for their passion. They can drive them to madness, do crazy things, which kind of reflects on the whole aspect of the kind of Hollywood and the Cold War, and how a lot of paranoia revolving around that. Obviously about communism and things like that. Charlie Chaplin again, but also about how actors and writers and people actually who work within Hollywood are struggling to adapt to what's happened in the world and things like that. So I think this is a really strong film, writtenly and filmically. It's sort of very simple narrative structure. There's obviously a narrator of the main writer who talks over there, giving his thoughts and feelings. But it's a very strong film for the time, and I think it's still strong today. It's got some great cinematography, really good actors in it as well, and it's a good film of this generation. So the next film I'm about to talk about is a film made in 1952 by John Ford called The Quiet Man. And the reason why I picked this film is it's quite a comical film. It's very funny in its sense, but it's also still got them underlying meanings and themes that a lot of the other films that I've been talking about have similar to it. But obviously the film, this basically stars, main character is John Wayne, and he comes back from America to his homeland of Ireland where he was born, and he wants to buy the house he was born in and obviously start a new life there. So you're obviously curious about why he's come back and where he's got all this money from to buy the house. All the way through the story, all the characters of Ireland kind of get a bit suspicious of him, who there's a Yankee in their town and stuff like that. So there's a lot of underlying discrimination that's quite funny, but it's light-hearted. But the great thing about this film is, I think John Ford displayed a sense of realistic comedy, but in a drama type-esque narrative form. And there's some visuals in this that really, really are nice. I mean, a lot of the visuals are of the landscape of Ireland, the paradise, the beauty. And I think that's one of the things that kind of relates back to what I was saying about the unsettlement of what the world at that hand at that time. How people didn't really know where their place was in the world in terms of a paradise, you know. They wanted a nice landscape, a nice place to live, without the war, just a peaceful life really, no violence. And this film did try to display that in its own way, through John Ford's direction. The characters themselves, you know, they relate to each other in a funny way, but at the same time there's a lot of conflict. And there's a few things you end up learning about the main character that kind of think, well, why is he called the Quiet Man? And you end up finding out he's actually killed someone by accident before, so there's a lot of underlining dark secrets and context, but on the surface there's a lot of, you know, nice and comical, fluffy aspects as well about the characters. And it's got a really nice happy ending in this film. And really, it really is a, you know, heart pleaser. And it's one of them's comfort stories, but it does show you, you know, how the world can be messed up sometimes, but at the same time there's a lot of beauty in the world, there's a lot of good. And good and bad go hand in hand. It's a chaotic world of nature. It's, you know, we're chaotic in ourselves. This relates into that film by the main character. You know, he's a good man, he's a quiet man, he's good, but at the same time he has done some things that he regrets and have made him to be out to be a bad guy. But that happens in all of us. We've all got that kind of aspect of ourselves. So it's a great film in itself at the time and how it reflects on the 50s, what it tried to do. And the way it's filmed, the way the camera work is, it all kind of reflects on that idea of beauty in the world. That the world is good, even if we are at war sometimes. And I think that reflects back on what I've been saying for the previous film, but in a more comical way. And it's a really good film to do that in the way it's done by John Ford's direction. Yeah, great film. Next film I'd like to talk about is a Japanese film made in 1954 about 7 samurai warriors called The Seven Samurai by Akira Kurosawa. Now this film in particular is epic. I mean, it's grand scale, even though it's a very small and confined story in terms of what happens. The basic plot is, you know, a small village in Japan keep getting attacked by bandits for their food and, you know, their foragings, and they're left with nothing. So they're pretty much, you know, they're beggars. Even though they work hard all year round to grow their crops, they're not getting stolen. So one of the young fellows from the village decides, right, you know, I've had enough of this, I'm going to get some help. And he ends up trying to get the traditional samurai warrior to help. You know, they're honoured, they're a respectable kind of traditional warrior and protector, kind of like an ancient police, if you will. So eventually, yeah, they eventually get these seven samurai warriors together who end up protecting the village, and ends up being such an action masterpiece, you know, even though it's confined in its area of, you know, its space and time. It's very much got a lot of epic action scenes and great soundtrack and things like that. But I think, you know, this film to come out in the 50s, I mean, you think predecessor, they would have done so much more before, but I think the wrong reasons why this probably was made in this time is because, again, the world was in that state of where a lot of things were happening in terms of the war and things like that. There was a lot of paranoia. There was a lot of, even in the East, even though the wars were happening in the West, it was a world war, remember? So, you know, and obviously the Japanese were involved, there was nuclear explosion, things like that. So I think, personally, I think maybe what the director or even the writer was exploring is nostalgic values of life and morale and morality, and how the older kind of life and was much better, it was much more safe and things like that. And as modernity comes into play in our world, that a lot of people have got a bit of paranoia and fear of that, and they'd rather traditional ways of living. Hence why the farming and the samurais and stuff like that. And it's some great action scenes in this. Obviously, you've got the great thing as well. Each of the characters, and mainly a few of them, have got these great personalities. They all add to it, and it makes it kind of fun and funny, but at the same time, it's very strong in its character dialect and gives that more depth to the characters, gives more depth to the storyline. Hence why I think a lot of people loved it. It gives you a much more better connection with the film, even if it is Japanese and you're English. It's there's doesn't matter what language it is, you kind of got that still humanity connection with it. And yeah, Akira Kurosawa has done a great job in direction. Some really powerful shots, especially when there's this main guy in it who's obsessed with trying to fight. He's an aggressive type character, but he has got a heart of gold. His heart's in the right place. And eventually, he gets his moment. He gets his moment on the screen. That's right at the end, and he's basically taunting this bandit, and eventually you stab him. And you're like, yeah, you get excited for him. You get that passion for him to kind of drive out the bad guys. Good and evil. And I think that's another thing that traditionally I think people like is the good and bad. So war is about making peace, obviously, and finding understanding, democracy and things. But it's also goes back to underlining context is good and evil. The good people want peace, bad people want to make war and to take over the world. And I think these traditional kind of stories of good and evil and honour and morality and keeping peace amongst the people has come out because of these factors of what's happening in the world, and it's a reflection of what's been going on, like the war and things like that, especially between America and Japan, like Pearl Harbor and things. So I definitely see a connection. I could be wrong, this could be just a theory, but that's how I look at it. I mean, it's these films make an historical impact because of certain things about them, and critics will always find their own interpretation of what they think the film was trying to talk about, send a message about, or what it was trying to do. And I think this film was trying to give them kind of ideas and trying to live that life again, and it does it beautifully and with such great visual artistic nature. So yeah, definitely a great film of the era. Now, an important film for the time of 50s, obviously, as I was saying about the bigger and better films, is a film by Cecil D. DeMille made in 1956 called The Ten Commandments. I don't know if you know about the story, but basically the story is about Moses and how he believes that he can, contact God. He ends up getting these 10 commandments from God to give to the people and to obviously, live that life under God's will of the 10 commandments. So, thou shalt not kill and things like that. Most of the 10 commandments are still in today's Bibles about, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not, do unto others or you want to do unto yourself, things like that. And again, it's funny how a story of morality has popped up again, how trying to keep in place the things that we believe to make us human and, how we live by. Even though this film's obviously, it's from a book, so it's fictional, it's an epic tale. I mean, it's very visual, it's very long, and I guess this is again what Hollywood are trying to experiment with, bigger and better films. Maybe that will, get more people interested in our ideas in the films. And this film is visually epic. I mean, it's all widescreen. The footage is stunning in terms of its visual effect, very colourful. There's obviously gone a lot of detail into the costumes and the sets, which again that makes the image bigger and more powerful. And there's some great scenes in it where obviously Moses parts the sea, and obviously all the people were trying to escape from the rule of the other people run through, and obviously the bad guys come along and try to hunt them down, but obviously Moses closed the sea and they all get washed away. So it's a great tale of living as good people under a certain type of ideology of how you should live, and obviously this one being the 10 Commandments. So very religious based idea of how we should live. But again, I think this film again reflects on the situation of what was going on in the world about the war and how countries weren't getting along and peace needed to be kind of made and confined to our lands. And the Ten Commandments was obviously brought out to give the people a sense of idea of how they should live and a sense of comfort in the world is still safe, even if countries are at each other's throats. Because obviously it happens in this film. You know, there's a lot of, attacking from each side of the story, points of view, and another great thing about this film is obviously the main character he believes he comes from a royalty of family, so a very powerful family, but eventually finds out he doesn't. He's actually born of a poor family, and this drives him to make, well, hang on a minute, I've been tricked here. I want to get the people I believe in, my people, the poor people, I want to give them as good as I've had as being powerful. So he tries his hardest to do that, and he finds meaning for them, not necessarily through power, but through meaning. The Ten Commandments. So, this, again, all goes back to what was happening in that time, obviously predecessor to the pre-war stages of the war and the Cold War and things like that. There was a battle over power, and I think this is another one of them films that reflects on power and meaning of life and how we choose to live and how we choose to be in peace with each other. And it's definitely another one of them films that deals with that situation at hand. Just like the other two films I've spoke about, and Cecil D. DeMille portrays that in a very personal engagement with the characters, but also on a large scale as well. From some various of the scenes, you get that sense of, what the main character is trying to do, what the hell Ten Commandments means to people, and how it's like a book of life, really, like the Bible is. It's a way of life, a way of belief, of what you want to believe in. And this was kind of reinstated by Hollywood to give people of the world more comfort and less fear of what potentially could happen after the Second World War. It's a great film for its time, very visually stunning, and it definitely grips you and touches you in a place that you thought would never be, in the heart and mind, really. So, great film. Next film I'm going to be talking about is quite different from the last three. It's not a very big film in terms of its structure, narrative structure, and how it looks. And this was a film made in 1957 by Sidney Lumet, and this is called 12 Angry Men. Now, the reason why I picked this film is obviously because of what happens, the kind of structure of the film, what it's about, and things like that. And again, how this film relates to what I'm talking about as the post-war period and things like that, and the things I've been talking about with each film. So this particular film, 12 Angry Men, is about 12 men on a jury who they basically hold someone's life in their hands about making a decision whether this young boy is guilty or innocent about the death of his father. So what happens basically is they all go into the back room to decide if he's guilty or innocent, and what happens is 11 of them agree that he's guilty, one agrees he's not, on one doubt. So all the way through the story, it's basically this one guy has to convince the 12 jury of why he doubts that this boy is a murderer and killed his father. So that's the storyline basically. So the great thing about, again, like I was saying about this film, is it's confined in one room. You don't go outside of the room. There's like one shot at the end that shows the outside of the courthouse, obviously, and building. And there's I think there's one shot inside the courtroom. That's it. Everything else, the whole hour and I think a half over that, is set in one room with 12 characters. So you can imagine the amount of intensity and grippage would be happening in that one space of time. So there's obviously 12 different characters in this, so it gives you a nice variant of different characters, different perspectives on it, different backgrounds and outcomes of what's going to happen. But like I said, the great thing about this film is the way the characters interact with each other. There's a lot of different ways of people act, reflects on how they were brought up, what kind of society they live in, and things like this. So you get a lot of some of the characters in there are quite traditional. You know, they assume the worst of some people, depending if they're poor. They would obviously assume that they're scum because they're poor, they don't have nothing. They would kill someone like that. There's a few others that have actually. There's one other character that's actually brought up in the same area the murderers or the defendant is brought up in, so he has a nice connection there. There's obviously a foreigner in there who's obviously not American, so that brings in like a worldly kind of commune there, not just American. There's also an old man there as well, which gives you kind of a much more older kind of generation of how to view things. There's one guy who's very dominant in terms of the way he speaks about the case and things like that. He's obviously had some troubles with his own life in terms of children and things like bringing up kids. So yeah, you've got a nice variant of different views of how they think this murder plays out, and obviously eventually, they all turn and end up all saying he's innocent. But the great thing is, you have to watch that film and find out how that happens. So as I was saying, yeah, it's got a great intensity all the way through. Always there's little bits of information given. Even the characters, even when they're just talking casually to each other about each other's lives or things like that, they often give off information that you don't necessarily always take into consideration because you're focused on the case of what they're talking about. So that's one thing to kind of pay attention to, is what they talk about amongst each other when they're not talking about the case, because they always give off information of what can actually relate to the case at hand and why they may have a doubt. And yeah, very, very well directed. The camera angles, the intensity of the lighting and the way it's shot, and the music as well. It's very, very gripping, engaging. You kind of end up feeling like you're there, and you want to know why this guy believes this guy's innocent, and you end up finding out, and you end up thinking, well, wow, this happens in everyday life, in the world, in reality, not just in a film world. People are just thrown away or sentenced to death. And if there's a doubt, it's normally because the doubt is true and they're innocent. But people just get, killed off in that time quite a lot, or sent to death row. So it makes you think, realistically, like, wow, this, when you have someone's life in your hands, you really have someone's life in your hands. It's very important that you make the right decision. So always follow your heart and your mind, obviously. But again, this relates back to the whole power thing, instability in the world and things like that, and it relates back into the characters in this one. So it's also about power, having that power of someone's life. In respect to the actual war, it's having that power over the world, whether you want to rule everyone or have peace and give everyone their own fair chance. So yeah, definitely a film that relates to that period and what it tried to portray in that time. Now, the last one I'm about to talk about is a film made in 1959 by Francis Truffaut called The 400 Blows. Now, the interesting thing about this film is it's very simple, but at the same time it's one of them films of the French New Wave. They class it as a French New Wave film. And that's because of the way the film is narratively structured in terms of editing of shots. And in my opinion, I see it as more of a docudrama. It's got that realistic documentary feel to it that obviously is quite a theme that happens nowadays in modern films. But I guess it was one of the first films to kind of do that, give you a docu kind of drama aspect on a story and situation. And obviously the plot of this film is about a young adolescent boy who's growing up, but he struggles to kind of find his place in the world and what his happiness, and he's got problems at home, he's got problems at school, he's got problems wherever he goes, and the blows keep coming for him, hence the title really, even though that's the 400 blows means something to do with juvenile, custody and things like that. But the film's quite a sad one, but very sentimental and sweet in itself. How the characters relate to each other and what you see in terms of his life and how it pans out. And I think the interesting thing about this film is the way it's shot is very good, because sometimes there's a few shots where nothing really, obviously there's no continuity of editing to a build-up. It's sometimes just observational shots of certain things that are happening, and you just sit there and think, oh, that's fascinating, that happens like that, does it? Okay, that's cool. But the last shot is one of the most impressive ones, because the last shot is where the actual main character, the young boy, looks at the camera. So he breaks the fourth wall. And obviously there's other films that have done that, but that's one of them techniques that has never really been used that much, and so that kind of adds to the new wave of films again, the experimentalism of it. And the way this is directed, it's got that realistic approach, and I think that's mainly because a lot of influence from Andre Bazin, because in fact Francis Truffaut classed him as one of his teachers, you know, a spiritual teacher, teachings of life and things like that. And I think it reflected in the film because of it. Unfortunately, Andre Bazin didn't get to see the film, but I think if he was alive, he would have saw it and appreciated it to the highest level possible. So yeah, this is a very sweet film. There's a lot of sweet things that happen. It's a great film to watch. So gripping with the characters, but at the same time it's very observational. So you get that kind of step back in look kind of observation of it, and you think, wow, Paul, you really do feel sorry for him. You really see what's going on in that time of France, and how young kids did struggle to grow up, and how a lot of trouble they had, and a lot of patience they didn't get from the adults. But I guess that kind of relates back to the whole aspect again about the unsettlement of the war and things, is finding your place and being alone, really, not having anyone there to support you or be on the same wavelength. And war has that same effect. No one's on your side. No one's, there's no comfort. There's no peace. And that's another reflection and theme within this film again, but from a realistic point of view, and just from a child's point of view, or adolescent child point of view. But the great thing again I liked about this film is right at the end, the boy got to see one thing he always wanted to, and that was the sea. He always gone about how he's never seen the sea because he's a city boy. But at the last shot he does, and I think that's kind of why Francis Truffaut got him to look at the camera at the last shot to say, look at the camera and say, yeah, I've seen the sea, I'm actually quite happy now, I've found my place in the world. So yeah, it really does reflect on the time and brings up the same kind of meanings and methods that all these films did, and it's a really good film, really good film. So after watching these films and learning about a few things and theories that I've come up with, what have we learned? Well, we've learned that in the time of the war, the post-war, that there was a lot of tension, there was a lot of uncomfortableness, there's a lot of uncertainty of what was going to happen and what meaning was left in life and humanity. But there's all these films that have been portrayed in certain ways, certain styles, certain narrative forms, certain colours, certain languages, that they're all kind of trying to do the same thing. They're all trying to find a meaning in life and try and give people in the world, the viewer, a meaning of themes, or open their eyes up to certain subjects and things like that. So I think that's what I've learned, and I feel that these films really did, give a sense of hope, a sense of comfortability in the world after what's happened. But in their own little ways, the serious ways, the comical ways, the action ways, the traditional story ways. It's all done differently, but you all kind of get the same feeling and understanding from each one, if you look at it like that. I mean, if you look at it from just an entertainment perspective, you're not going to get that. So you need to kind of broaden your mind a bit when you're watching these films, maybe watch them twice for that reason. So yeah, I don't know what you've learned. Maybe you'd like to tell me, make a comment or something like that. Obviously, thank you for watching, thank you for taking the time to watch this, and hopefully you've learned something, and hopefully you've kind of thought about what I've said. Maybe you've got your own thoughts. If you have, post me a comment, or even if you've got videos on them, send me the links. I'd love to watch. And yeah, please like and share this video if you want to. That's fine. And obviously like it if you like. And I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll see you soon.